Hey guys, welcome back to week 12 of the Axial Deadbolt budget build. For those of you that are new to the build, what we do is we started with a bone stock Axial Deadbolt here, and every week we throw $50 into the build and upgrade whatever we can with that money. If we have some held over, we take it to the next week and upgrade from there. This week actually is going to be just a little bit different than my schedule was really planning on. I last weekend got out on the trails because it was a nice 60-degree day in the middle of January. The truck did fantastic, but while we were out on the trail, we ended up tearing up the gears in that stock servo. We're going to get into the details of servos next week, as well as how to repair this servo if you want to keep that one, or servos that we're going to upgrade to, but again, next week. However, I will be putting in a high torque servo on this, a really high torque servo, which is going to take power. Now, in preparation of that, this week what we're going to do is install a Castle BEC. Now, those of you that have been following this build know that I've already actually got a BEC tucked in on the side here, but it's not actually installed. It was just something I did so that I wouldn't have to unsolder my Dean's plug after I'd already soldered it initially. So we're actually going to get it installed after this week, but I will have a new one here on the shelf that I want to use, just kind of talk through it, get some demonstration about. I am going to tell you what it does, how it does it, and why you need it versus the one that is built into most ESCs. For you guys just looking for a super quick little explanation of how to install this before we get into all the details, let's hit it really quick. First, take the red and black wires from your BEC and hook them up to the red and black wires going to the battery connectors from your ESC. At that point, always remember to unplug your LiPo, as this thing does not have a low voltage cutoff. So never leave your LiPo plugged in overnight or for any period of time unless you're running the truck. Then you can simply take the plug from the BEC, plug it into your receiver, take the plug from your ESC and remove the center red wire from this plug, pull it back and tape it back to the wire there because you may need to plug it back in to program it in the future. Then take that plug, plug it into the receiver, and lastly, plug your servo into your receiver as well. Then your power from the BEC will be transmitted through the receiver to your servo. Now, that isn't the most efficient way to do it. You can get a bypass adapter from Holmes Hobbies. You can find the link in my description here. And what you'll do for that is you'll plug this Castle BEC into the plug on one end, the servo on the other, and then you'll have one plug left that plugs into your receiver. That is the most efficient way to get power directly from your BEC to your servo. So look into that if you're just looking for a quick fix. What I want to talk about first is why you need this. So now, many of you may have noticed problems with your rigs before. Specifically, say you went from a 2S LiPo to a 3S LiPo, and then all of a sudden, whenever you tried to turn your wheels, your truck would shut down or brown out, we would call it that. Now, that's because the internal BEC was actually running out of power output and causing the entire system to brown out, usually by dropping voltage further than the receiver could operate at. So it shuts the truck down, and then likely you would have to either turn it on and turn it back off to fix it, or just have to pull it away and unload the servo. That is a strong case and one of the easiest ways to know that you need to add a BEC. Now, inside of this ESC, which stands for Electronic Speed Control, is a BEC. Like what we're using over there, but built a little bit differently. BEC stands for Battery Elimination Circuit, which makes a little bit less sense than electronic speed control, but just so that you guys know the terminology. Now, the BEC that is inside of this ESC takes the voltage from your battery and steps it down to the voltage that your receiver and then servo need to see. This battery is a 3S LiPo, and fully charged it puts out a little bit over 12 volts. Now, most receivers and servos operate somewhere in that 4.8 to 6 volts and sometimes a little bit higher. What we have to do is the BEC, again, has to step that down. And it uses a resistor to do that because the style of BEC inside of this ESC is called a linear BEC. Now, linear BECs step down that voltage by bleeding it off with that resistor. And what that does is that causes a lot of heat. Now, if we were using a linear style BEC to try and produce the same amount of power as that Castle BEC that we're going to add, it would be twice the size of this ESC just for that component. The reason is because the BEC that we're adding is called a switching style BEC. Now, it's a little bit less important why it does what it does, but it's much more efficient than the linear style that we have here. What you run into with the linear styles is it just generates too much heat to generate as much power as we need for a BEC. So you open up the package and this is what you find. The 10 amp BEC in the middle there. On one side, you've got your power leads, which you will have to solder to your battery plug. If you don't know how to solder, try and find someone in your local area, hobby shop or something like that that can give you a hand. On the other end, you're going to find a typical receiver plug. We're going to go over exactly how you use this to power up your servos and such here in just a few minutes. Now, again, I said this was a 10 amp BEC, listed as a 10 amp peak BEC, obviously. The peak versus constant power is where that differs a little bit, but even the constant rating on this is around 7 amps for most applications with running a 3S battery or less. 3S or 2S, you're really going to get about that 7 amps constant output if needed. However, even rigs running 2 servos, you're really not going to have much of an issue. But again, this is kind of all talking in generalities, and there is specific situations where that may not be enough, but we are going to try and keep it fairly high level today. Something to note is that even a switching BEC like we have here cannot increase the voltage output that you have. It can only give a maximum amount of what you already are running. So if you had a 2S LiPo and as you got close to the cutoff point, which maybe 3 volts per cell, so 6 volts. Even if you had this programmed via the Castle link to 7.4 volts, in the end you would only be outputting the voltage of the battery, which again could be as low as 6 volts if you were running a 2S. If you're running a 3S pack, you're probably never going to run into that particular situation. Now into hooking up the Castle BEC. Now again, the power lead on the BEC, you need to hook up into your battery plug. So what you'll want to do is hook that up to the red and black wire that go from your ESC to your Dean's connector or whatever style connector that you're running. Now something to mention is that a BEC does not have a low voltage cutoff or anything like that in it. So once you hook that straight up to your battery, make sure that you always disconnect your battery from the truck every time. If you're running LiPos, do that anyway. Don't leave your LiPo plugged in to your rig. Over time, you can definitely bleed off that power and end up with a way under voltage LiPo, and that can cause you problems. Just a general rule of thumb, make sure to always unplug your LiPos. So now at this point, we've got our BEC plug, our ESC plug, and our servo plug that we all have to figure out how we plug them in, what goes to what, and where they go on our receiver. Now, the simplest way to hook up this system is to use a bypass adapter. Holmes Hobbies sells an extremely simple little adapter that you plug the BEC into, the servo into, and then you plug the one wire that comes off of it right into your receiver. That's the easiest way to do it, and what it does is it sends power directly from the BEC to the servo. No middleman with the receiver. Easiest way you can do it as far as just plugging things in. But there are other ways. Now, another way to do it is to take the BEC, ESC, and servo plugs, plug them all right into the receiver. But if you do that, there's one other very important step, and that is this ESC that you have here, you need to remove the center wire from that servo plug. What that is that's the wire that the internal BEC inside of this is feeding power out to. That was what was previously running your servo and receiver. The reason that you need to unplug that wire is because if you have these two things feeding into your receiver, they can fight each other. And what's going to lose is going to be inside of your ESC most likely. So that is why you need to remove that red wire. The easiest way to remove this red wire is to simply pull up the center tab on the middle of that red wire and then just pull out that little connector. Take it back and electrical tape it, somehow protect it on that thing there. Because what you will have to do is if you ever want to plug in your ESC to something like a Castle link, you'll have to reinstall that. But that is a way to get this whole system installed without having to buy an extra adapter. Now, the one downside to that setup is that inside of this receiver are little electrical traces. Those are the wires, basically. They're a copper trace on a printed circuit board that carries the power. Now, that is going to possibly become your limiting factor as far as your power handling. So that is something to consider when trying to figure out exactly how you would like to wire this. But you can simply do that very easily, and it won't cost you anything extra as far as like a bypass adapter goes. But again, a bypass adapter, the most straightforward way to get power from your BEC to your servo with no middleman. And in that case, you can leave the red wire installed on your ESC, and that is what's going to power your receiver. So I hope that I didn't confuse you guys. I know it can probably be a little overwhelming. Those acronyms can even get me a little tongue-tied at times. So I'll try and answer any questions you guys have. If you have questions specifically on how to install a BEC. I will also try and make sure that I've got wiring diagrams easily accessible for you guys if you need a little bit more visual help with exactly how to install this. For those, try and look at my description here. If they're not up yet, I'll try and get them up as soon as I can. I'll likely have them hosted on my website at Harley Designs. On my website as well, I'll try and have a typed out step-by-step description on how to do this, just because I know it can be so unclear at times. Hopefully I didn't get too in-depth with much of the terminology. I know I did touch a little bit on switching and linear and some resistors and things like that, but bottom line is get a BEC in your car. It's going to help your performance. Don't go and just use something like a glitch buster or something like that. A BEC can really upgrade the performance of even something like a stock servo by giving it some more voltage. You will need a Castle link to program one of these though. So make sure you have access to one of those, because stock, they come set at something like 5.1 volts. And what I'm going to probably run this thing at is closer to 7.4 volts. But make sure to check your servo specifications to what it can run, as well as your receiver. Check both of those items. Make sure that they can handle whatever voltage you're going to run depending on how you're wiring your BEC. Again, details, I'll try and cover those in text on my website. Find the link below. I'll try and get that done as soon as possible. But with that, next week I am going to get a servo installed here. I'm going to go over some options, some budget options for you guys who just need to get your car back on the trail after breaking a servo, some options in the middle, and then some options for those of us that want a full, high power, ultra high torque, and fast servo. Don't underestimate the benefits of a fast servo. Can really help in certain situations, especially when competing. Hopefully that was somewhat clear to you guys, or I give you the resources to help figure it out. If not, feel free to comment below. I really try and take care and get to as many comments as I can. Or go over to Facebook, facebook.com/Harley Designs, and I'm pretty attentive to get back to messages on there as well. But that's all I have for today, guys. We are going to leave the truck sitting here in kind of a sad, broken state for one more week. But next week, we're going to have it all put back together and ready to get back on the rocks again in case we get one of those nice days. But with that, we'll see you guys next week.